Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained, mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today, we are joined by a returning guest, Deb Antich, the Traveling Psychic, who you can connect with at Traveling Psychic on Instagram and other social media outlets. And we are glad to have you back, Deb. And for everybody else who's tuning in, make sure that you strap in as we examine the edges of the unknown. Welcome back, Deb.
Hello, guys.
When we last spoke, we were just a fledgling podcast, only 8 episodes in. And now this is episode 41. We've been going for about 6 months. It's so good to have you back. Kyle and I have often talked about how your first episode is one of our favorite episodes, and you're one of our favorite guests. And so we wanted to reach back out to you and catch up with you and see how things were going. And maybe get your sense of where things are going on a larger scale. So tell us again, remind us about Traveling Psychic Supper Club and the work that you do, and then we'll get into the topics.
Okay. So Traveling Psychic Supper Club started back I want to say, 2011 was a big year, and so I'll put it there. And then just a group that would meet monthly in different restaurants in Austin, locally owned, just to have the conversation about intuition. And I was, my clients, and this is interesting because I think it's going to come into this episode too, about how people are connected through their readings. And so I was just seeing people are connected to through their readings. They should just meet each other, and then let's make it public so that other people can come. And so that's what we did. And that group gained a lot of momentum. I also had a radio show for a while, and then I kind of just had the feeling of like, okay, this has run its course, but it always just kind of pops its head back up again. We are October, we're going to be doing a dinner at the Driscoll, which is a famously haunted hotel in Austin, which has kind of been my home base, for a while. And it'll be good to go back. So that's kind of the Supper Club in a nutshell. And I've met some super incredible people through it that have, gone on to move on to other parts of the country or world. And it's great to be able to stay connected through intuition. So, which is what brought me back to you guys again. So
that's so great. Yeah. Kyle and I recently cut our teeth on ghost hunting, and we had we went to a not local, but kind of just outside of the Phoenix area, went to an old school that's been turned into a museum. And we spent probably 6 hours there after hours with a group of 20 or so individuals, trying to identify whether there were ghosts there, what their names were, why they were haunting, basically. And varying degrees of success, I'd say.
So what was so I'll ask you now, I'll be the interviewer for a second. And you guys are like, oh, great. No, we're the interviewers. But what was your biggest takeaway from that? What stuck out to you the most? Because I think people have a very different idea of ghost hunting from what they see on TV and to what the actual experiences are that they had.
Yeah, I'd say I'll come at it from the very much newbie outsider perspective. I don't really get a lot of ghost interactions in my life. If I've ever had any, I'm not sure that I have, but to me, it seemed like a lot more work than I was expecting it to be. There was a lot of effort, a lot of waiting, a lot of listening intently for some signal, in the dark with a ghost box there or a spirit box there to try and identify whether there was some intelligent entity that was trying to reach out to us.
Yeah.
I didn't feel a whole lot of presence, although there was a moment where we were passing through a doorway and I thought I heard a child's voice speak to me. And that kind of stopped me in my tracks. But otherwise, it was just kind of a lot of standing around and hoping that something would happen.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was expecting it to be, but it wasn't that.
I feel like you can do that on your own and get so, not talking anything on ghost hunters by any means, but like, I feel like the less tools you have, the more you can pick up. I feel like sometimes relying too much on tools is you can miss other things because you're looking to the tool to give you what you already have available to validate within yourself,
Yeah.
And I think that's the case in a lot of places, instead of people allowing that inner voice to be the thing that's like, this is what this is, not looking outside of themselves. I think it's a good way of looking at anything, listening for your own intuition to tell you. So did you hear that? So, I'm going to ask this question. Whenever you thought you heard a child's voice or felt, where did you like feel it in here? Or do you know?
So we were walking through a door and what I heard was kind of a high pitched "bye guys." That was the phrase, "bye guys."
I heard a squeak.
And I stopped and I was like, "Did you guys hear that?" And there were Kyle and another guy were like, "Yeah, we heard that, but I just thought it was a squeaky hinge." And so we turned back to the door to see if we could repeat the squeaky hinge.
Mhm.
It did squeak, but not in the same pitch. And so I was like, it's inconclusive. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of frame it like this was, how when you go to the zoo and you look at animals, it's neat, but you don't necessarily have a connection to those animals.
Right.
Versus when you're at home interacting with your own pets. There's a love, a bond there with your pets versus the animals at the zoo. And that's kind of how I felt. Like I was going to this ghost hunt to be entertained by spirits that I didn't have any connection to.
Right.
And that was the part that I kind of left me disconnected. I mean, the people who put on the ghost hunt, I will say they rolled out the red carpet for us, and I'm very grateful. And they were very gracious hosts. I thought they had an excellent, bedside manner for everything. So I don't want to detract from the effort that they put in at all. But for me, that was the issue. Is like I don't know these spirits. What are they going to tell me that's going to be of any use to me?
So I got 2 points to that. Was you're right, because we were all in this room and everybody is staring at these flashlights and this spirit box waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here looking through this window and I'm watching this dark figure walk back and forth in the room next to us. And everybody's just staring down, waiting for something. And I'm like,
you're like,
it's right there. You're right. I didn't need any tools. I didn't need anything. I just looked over and I just watched this mass pace back and forth the entire time we were sitting there.
Yeah.
As everybody was staring at this spirit box and these flashlights waiting for them to try to turn off and on.
Yeah. And so even while you're saying that, the feeling that I get is, I'm right here, guys. Like, all you got to do is look up. Like, I'm right here. And I think that it's interesting too, just to kind of, that the ones that show up on the boxes are kind of like the ones that want to get attention, right? And a lot of times it's because the feeling that I get is there's the ones that are like, okay, I want to get these people's attention, but the ones that might have like a richer experience, to me, what you just described was a richer experience. Right. Seeing this mass walking back and forth. And while everybody else is like super tuned into something else. And then also like Sam, you walking through, and I want to say that doorways are, can hold a lot of energy. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, while I'm saying this, what I see is like, it's a narrowing down, right? When you're in a big room, there's a lot of space for energy to be. But when you narrow it down to go through a doorway, and I don't know why doorways, in addition to what I just said, but so that's interesting even to think about. That's something I'm gonna have to think about. But that doorways do hold a lot of energy.
Yeah, it reminds me of that the like the Japanese Shinto torii gates that designate a mundane space from a divine space. And so when you pass through that torii gate, you have to kind of cleanse or purify your heart as you pass through, because you're going into a sanctified space.
Well, it's interesting too, because when you said that, it's also, you're making a choice, right? To move from one space that you know, possibly into one that you don't. And so there is like an energy that gets collected there. And like the word I'm hearing is unknown. Even if it's a space that I mean, just to open a door and go through it is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is energies that can collect around that, you know, and even the energy that it might. So also, I'm not trying to make this whole show about your ghost hunt experience, but it's also that going back to ones that want to connect with people that are trying to look at a box or like really hone in on that, there might be some other energy that's like, well, I'm going to use this tool to be able to communicate. And I like what you said, because it's so easy to be like, oh, well, that was just a squeaky door. Like that couldn't have been that thing. But the fact that you were like, but the pitch was different, right? There's something that catches the ear or the attention or touches you in a different way in your body that is not your ears. You know, that's why I asked, like, where did you experience it? Because you guys know that, like, whenever someone says something that's true, like I'll get that tingle from my knee down to my ankle on my left leg. Like if I get that, then I know, okay, this is true. You know, this is actually something that happened. It wasn't just somebody's imagination. But yeah, so can I share something really quick about a ghost hunting experience that I went to? So
Absolutely.
I've been called in on some to be present, like as the clairvoyant. But this was something that I did years ago whenever Paranormal State was on the air, like so that long ago. My daughter and I went to New York to Katie's Bar, which is very haunted. It was a whole like weekend that they did. It was like a field trip. And going back to what you're saying, because the energy of everybody there was so wanting to have something happen, sometimes I almost feel like other energies will pull back and just be like, whatever, dude, like we'll let the other one step forward because we're not interested in this. It's almost like too much of a light being shined. But the experience that we had, so my sister and I ended up hanging out with the owner, Brian, who is awesome, and his door guy, Damien. They took us, it had nothing to do with what was like sanctioned, to an abandoned asylum. It's on Long Island. And we had with no machinery, like and actually Brian didn't go. I think it was just Damien that took us. And it was a smaller group. It was like people that had kind of connected from the bigger group. And there were and again, no tools. The feeling at that space, it was like, there were some ominous feelings in some spaces, but then there were also some just feelings of like, you felt like somebody just wanted to be heard. And because it was one of this, I think it was closed in like the 60s. So all the things that were going on with mental health, and there was a portion of it that still was open. But I'll tell you this story really quick. My sister had walked around the back and I was like, I'm not getting anywhere near that place. Like I stayed outside of the fence and, but you know, there was a group that did go in. And I just had this sudden feeling of like, they need to get out of there. Like they don't, and this feeling of like, not from inside of me, but from somewhere else that was like, they need to get out of there. And I called my sister's name and she came back and she said, I heard you call and I called her name is Stephanie, but Stephanie Lynn, like, you know, a parent, whenever you're in trouble, they use both names. And when I called her with my physical voice, I said, Stephanie Lynn. And she came back and she goes, I heard you in my head before I heard your physical voice. And she was like, I knew I needed to get like the hell out of there when she heard me, and then she heard me. And even like telling that story, like I get this feeling behind my eyes of the feeling that I got when we were on those grounds. And like we left after that. I was like, you guys, I know y'all are here to have some fun or whatever, but I don't see any fun. I was kind of like the joy killer, I guess. But I just had this feeling of like, it is time to go now. And I don't know that we would have gotten some of the stuff and some of the things that people picked up if we had had tools that, like Kyle is saying, like you're looking into like this. We were more open everywhere. So, and like I said, me being open like that anyway, I did not want to get any closer than I got to it.
Yeah, you know, the reliance on the tools is obviously a way to provide material confirmation or validation of a spiritual experience. And you know, and in my view, a lot of times those two things are not really compatible. And so that's probably why it takes so much time and effort to find those little pieces of physical or material evidence to validate those spiritual experiences. And I think that's what the point of the ghost hunt is, right? Is material validates spiritual. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Just, that's a fine endeavor and worthy of pursuit, I'd say. But as far as like an entertainment venue, I'm much more interested in finding insight. Right. You're not going to get insight from a ghost you don't know or spirit you don't know.
Well, and that's a good point too. And also the word entertainment, right? I mean, that's a different type of experience as well. And it'll draw different types of energies to it. So yeah, but were you glad you did it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it was so much fun. We're going to do another one here in a couple of weeks. Yeah, it was a ton of fun, and it was just cool to be able to go do it. But like, like I think, like when you were talking about, we're going here and there's no connection, and it's hard maybe to like find something. And I kind of believe that because it was like once I like move somewhere and I'm in a house, that's when I see the activity pick up. Once I'm comfortable and I've connected to my house and I'm part, it's part of me now. And it's a home. That's when I start seeing activity rise up. And I don't know if it's because I'm comfortable there or if because now I'm part of the house. You know what I mean? Like,
it's both. I mean, because the noises your house makes, right? Like, the squeaky door and how it's going to be different from what something else would be. And so I think it's both things. It's the comfort level, and then where you can say, well, that's not normal. That's not something that normally happens here. And then, like, I'm a big fan of just document, even if it's like putting it in your mind, like, okay, remember that, like documenting things to where you can be like, oh, that felt different, that, or there's a space that feels different, or there's a space maybe that needs attention. But yeah, that's, and I also wanted to mention too, some people are super drawn to ghost hunting. Like, I'm really drawn to going to just abandoned spaces, but not with the purpose of even finding anything, but just, and I think that's also, no, I know, that's a big part of intuition, which is just seeing what happens, just opening up, not for the purpose of, X, Y, or Z, but like, that's something that I really talk about a lot, is just being open and just saying, okay, when something does happen, because a lot of those shows, right, then the first thing you hear, and when they play it over and over again, is, did you hear that? Did you hear that? And so it's just saying, okay, what else? And saying it kind of like in your mind, and then almost like what else have you got for me? But not like, I need to validate this with the people around me. And I think that's how that's my experience, is that's how intuition grows, is just being open and saying, okay, that happened, and not needing to, jump all over it.
Like, I know there was a room in there, and it wasn't part of.
Wasn't part of the tour. They had it actually closed off.
Yes, but they had given us the red carpet, so they let us kind of mosey around and kind of do what we want, which was cool. But there was one. It was called the music room.
We just called it the music room.
Oh, but it was, every time I walked into it, like, there it was very warm that day and very warm in there. Like we were sweating as we were hanging around. And every time I would walk into this one room, it was instantly cold and it was instant goosebumps and it was instant like there was something there and it didn't, and I'd walk out, the goosebumps were gone, it was freaking hot again. Was it cold in there for you, Sam?
I did not experience that sensation, but you know,
it was every time we walked in, and you know, and we tried. I mean, I got to hear Sam sing "Mary Had a Little Lamb," so that was kind of a highlight of the night as well.
But yeah, we were trying to drum up. We were using music to try and drum up some activity.
Yeah.
But you're right. You just kind of open and you just, you know, and you just walk in, and once again, it was just one of those experiences that you can't, that a machine or can't capture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and probably isn't meant to capture. I mean, that's the other part where I feel like when people are super, you know, walking through with mics and, you know, spirit boxes and, you know, all this equipment, it's like, what are you putting between you and what you're trying to connect with, you know? And something that you said about it not being sanctioned, it's, to me, it's almost kind of like there's certain energies that would hang out in a space like that wouldn't be the ones that are there for the show. You know,
yeah, they don't want to be part of the traffic, right?
Right. Or they're like, oh, look at these fools over here. You know what I mean? Like, and it's kind of like the taking the other door. You know, just choosing something different. And I mean, it just also goes back to like attracts like. You know, the ones that want to be on a show are going to be the ones to show up where all the cameras and the equipment are. But the ones that don't might be the ones that connect with somebody that is not connecting with that. You know, kind of like you were saying, everybody was looking in their box, but you were looking. That's another thing too, is like having that wider perception. You don't have that when you're just looking at an instrument, right? It's so much, it goes back to the connection of if someone is sitting there open and just being like, I'm just going to see what I see here, you're going to have a different experience and you're going to connect with a different type of energy that probably isn't there to entertain somebody. That is that might not be looking for anything at all. It's kind of like the thing where it's like, oh, did you see that? And everybody else is like, what are you talking about? It's just the person that's sitting there open that like isn't wanting to connect with that other space. And that perception is wider. It's not pulled in. Like that's like when I read, and especially if somebody is like, oh, I'm trying to connect with this specific individual, I'm like, I can't guarantee that. And anybody that says that they can, I just personally, that's not my experience. And sometimes that person will show up, but I'm like, you have to just be grateful for whatever shows up and in whatever form it does. And so, yeah, that it's that wider and always like just kind of being like, that was interesting. Instead of like, did you hear that? You know, it's such a different feeling. Like the energy is so different from those two spaces.
Yeah.
See, that's something we've got to remember on our next ghost hunt, Sam, is we
got to separate ourselves from the EM fields and the REM pods.
Let's just keep it in the corner of our eye.
Yeah.
But just see what else is going on around us.
Yeah.
Use our personal receptiveness to try and draw some spiritual interaction.
Yeah. Or just see what happens. I mean, even making it so pointed, it's like, let's just go and like, to me, like whenever I say that, it's like, what do the walls look like? You know, and things start to kind of come together where you can, going back to connecting with the space, right? Like Kyle, what you were saying about when you're in a home for a while, you connect with that space. And even no matter how much time you're in a space, you can connect to it. And it's really an interesting space to be in, just going to try and connect with the space and then seeing what energies show up there. Because again, it's funny because while I'm saying this, like what I'm seeing is like a little kid's coloring book. It's like looking at the whole picture and not just, you know, coloring in one little space, kind of brushing with a broader stroke, I guess.
Yeah.
I think you'll get a lot more that way. It feels like, because like what I'm seeing is textures, like textures on a wall, where if you're, and it goes back to, if you're looking at electronics, like I have real issues with light, right? Like especially electronic light. If you're looking at electronic light and then you look up, your eyes are already like, they're they're because of the light. But when you're looking around, and this, Kyle, I'm going to go back to you just looking up and seeing something through a window. Your eyes are trained to be in that space, not to be in this super focused space.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's like the pirates had their eye patch to protect their eyesight at nighttime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a different eye. You saying that, literally, it's a different eye. We don't have to talk about this the whole time, but I just wanted to, and it does feel like that. And I think it's kind of like some of the things that we might move into is looking at broader scopes than just super pointed ones.
Yes.
Bigger picture versus smaller picture.
That's how I'm going into the next one.
Yeah. You guys will have to like text me or like send me a message through Instagram and share what your experience was versus the last. That's another thing too, is just like being able to do it over and over again, right? To be able to see how is this experience different from the last one. And even being able to do it over time, not like I'm saying you guys are going to become ghost hunters or anything like that, but like over time to where you can see how was my experience the first time different from the next few ones, because you'll start to build your profile of how you're connecting. And it's worth it because it carries over into life too. You'll see how those experiences can even like change the experiences that you have in your regular everyday life by looking back at how that got built or how it changed, like how, which is, I'm seeing a lot of that right now. Relationships shifting and changing very quickly. So, and being able to see the things leading up to it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, this is what happened. And even though you don't think it, oh, well, that happened super suddenly. Like what happened? Whenever you can kind of go back into points in your mind and be like, oh, this has been building for a long time.
Yeah.
It just felt like it was super sudden, right?
Yeah, we definitely have a lot to learn about these ghost hunts and what it is we're actually hoping to accomplish on a ghost hunt. I wasn't sure what my goal was or what I was going to be experiencing on the ghost hunt or what my end goal was. We had another psychic on the show, a psychic lawyer, Mark Anthony, came on and during our conversation, he just kind of dropped a reading on me that I wasn't expecting and started talking to me about my brother who passed away a long time ago. Before I was even born, he died, and starts telling me about my brother. And like that blew me away. And I would say that kind of 30-second experience was at least as impactful in my life as the 6 hours we spent at the ghost hunt.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because going into know what your goal is and don't be super pointed on it, but at least know what you're going in for. And I think that a lot of times, like you guys were saying a minute ago, people go in to be entertained, right? But there's different layers of things that you can get by being in a space. And but going in with like, this is at least what I would like to come out with, is it because, and this kind of goes back to, using tools that or people, not y'all, but using tools that they don't really understand. It's like, well, if you start tinkering with something that you don't really understand or know how to use, what are your results going to be? And so when people go in and I'm just going to say it again, like if you go in to be entertained, that's the kind of energy you're going to draw to yourself. But if you go in saying, this is what I would really, and having it be part of something bigger, like this is what I want to go in and explore. I think using the word explore is really important too, because you're like, it doesn't just have to be this one thing. I'm open. I'm open to whatever shows up. And I think too often we're like, it needs to be this, this, or this. It's good to have goals, right? But it's also good to be able to let something else come in.
Well, very good. The one other thing that we really wanted to talk to you about, and we were discussing before the show, is this idea that things are kind of heading to a hostile place or a place of conflict in our nation, in the world. There's the war in Ukraine that broke out earlier this year, and my question to you is, are you seeing things kind of like on an individual basis that stack up to kind of indicate where things are going?
Definitely. And this has been, like you said, the war broke out. And when you said that, it's like, this has been very calculated over time. And not just that, like not just the war, but so many different things. And like kind of like we were talking about before the show, is that we are moving towards a breaking apart, right? And it's even interesting because I was having this conversation with my husband about how in the U.S., right, everything it used to be very united under federal. Was it great? No. And this is in no way me making any kind of political like statement at all. But looking at, the United States were united. And then things started trickling down to like state levels. And now they're trickling down to local levels. Well, that makes it so there's no united anymore. And the same thing is happening in other places too. And I just, I was telling you, I don't ever really watch the news, but I happened to be hearing a story, and they were talking about how, Putin is really trying to reform, Mother Russia. And by, saying, okay, you're going to be in it, or we're going to force you to be in it, right? Like that's also causing this breaking apart. Like nobody thought that Ukraine would last as long as they have. But they're getting all this help from outside. And so it really is about, even though it's a world community, building these little communities. And it's a great analogy, like the war in Ukraine with Russia, right? Like, is that anyone that's being forced to do something, they're going to pull out and go somewhere else and connect with others that are doing the same thing. And we're really seeing a lot of that happen in the States too. But this is even happening like on micro levels of, so we had I've told you before that like my readings are usually connected. And what I'm seeing a lot of right now is boundaries that have been overstepped having to be reinserted and being looked at like that, and people just leaving relationships, like kind of like I was saying, this looks like it's sudden, but these things have been happening over time, and just completely disconnecting with even like families, what I'm hearing is breaking apart, but it's actually for the purpose of a reconnection somewhere else. And so, and like I was telling you before earlier too, like again, 2011 was a big year for a lot of this. This is when I started seeing all these different things happening that are now happening, like communities that are no longer sustainable, breaking apart, and people coming together in different places by the things that like what I hear is like-mindedness, right? That you've got, and people living very communally. I don't know what the real estate market is where y'all are, but I'm in Austin and it's bonkers. Like people cannot afford homes anymore. And so one of the things that I started seeing a long time ago was people being very nomadic and people living in more of a communal way. And I'm seeing a lot of that with some of the communities that I'm a part of, where people are moving around, staying with people that they know, not staying in hotels, right? Like staying with people, and maybe not even on purpose, they just end up there. And so there's a lot of things happening where what I'm hearing is like people are having the rug pulled out from underneath them, and they're having to go to people that might be having the same thing happening. And that's that kind of compound living that we're seeing, not in the way of, because you usually think compound and it's like, Jamestown, or I think that's what it's called, Jamestown,
Yeah, James.
or, like cult type living. And this is more just for sustainability. This is, and I'm also seeing a lot of that. Really what's going to be beneficial is because I've done a lot of work with the unhoused, right? Like homeless populations, and learning from that, because the people that are living up in the ivory towers that feel like, oh, well, I don't need to know those people because, I'm always going to have my home and my money and my status. Status is not going to matter at all. It is going to be like, like even while I'm talking, it's like money's not even going to matter. Like you can burn money and just it's kindling. It's a fire starter. So there's just a lot of things that are coming in. There's going to be a rebuild. There's an old way and a new way, and the ones that are connected to the old way are like what the word I hear is perish. There's just not. We're moving out of that into something completely different. And like the next question that I hear is like, well, what is that? Like from people are saying like, well, what is that? And we're literally building it as we go. There is no end result, because it's also being built differently in different places. And going back to people being nomadic, like we're learning from each other, but and also in ways that are like what I'm hearing is like hive mind. There's information that's being shared between, it's not being shared electronically, it's being shared energetically. And so, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of too, is information being shared, but like up here, not down here. Going back to like I was saying earlier, like I draw triangles a lot, and it's like a pyramid that's on the ground and then this open space that's above. And like when I read, that's where all the information is. So it's not the density that is what we see as like humanity, and like even like what I'm seeing in my mind is like cars or homes. We're moving into something completely different that is very, very mobile and nomadic.
One of the consequences of the pandemic and the years that have followed that kind of fallout was this constant marching out of experts to tell us what we should and shouldn't be doing, and then the inevitable and often immediate reversal of the expert opinions.
Yeah.
And it happens so often, so frequently, and with such, I would even say, catastrophic results, that there's a big distrust between the public and the so-called experts, right? And to the extent that you have people coming out saying, if you don't believe me, you don't believe science. It's capital S science. You don't believe science. And so there have been some people, some studies done about what people are turning to instead of public experts or official experts. Are you seeing a lot of people turning towards spiritualism, towards the types of reading services you provide, towards superstition? What are you seeing?
So I see a lot of, because the next thing that the next thing in that line is like folk healing, right? It's turning back to ancestry and roots, and that everything that we need is on the earth to sustain us. But what have we done? We've said, well, we're smarter than that. We know more than Mother Nature. So we're going to tinker and we're going to create something that is not sustainable. And so you asked me something, and I want to go back to that. Experts. I will tell you, an expert is someone that has lived it. If you learned it out of a book, I don't want to hear about it. And now data does matter, so I'm not going to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But just having the lived experience, that person is going to know something completely different than somebody that is a quote unquote expert. And that's why I say, going back to like the meek shall inherit the earth, because if you're poor and you've been able to do something with nothing, I'm here to learn from you.
Sorry.
Right. No, that's okay. I'm not here to learn from somebody that is in an office at, and nothing against universities, because I do work with universities, but that has not had their boots on the ground.
Mhm.
Do you know what? That's a big piece of it. And that's why I'm like, we have so much to learn. Instead of throwing the unhoused, trying to get them away, it's like, there's a whole lot to be learned there. And I will tell you, it's going to be very, very valid. And like I said, there's people that they learned it from a book, and I don't need that. Do you know what I mean? I need to learn from the people that have had the experience, because that's valid and that's real.
Yeah, because they've had it firsthand.
Yeah.
Like it's like saying, here's a problem, deal with it.
Right.
And you're going to have two very different ways. I mean, you're going to have a bunch, it's a spectrum, but you're going to have different ways of, even the approach is going to be different. I kind of go back to like whenever Apollo 13 got off course, right? They needed everybody to show up, but the people that knew what they were doing were the ones that were in the spacecraft. They could take information from, Houston, and it took both of them. So I'll walk back a little bit. There needs to be an intermeshing, but right now there's not. There's the camps are, they're like, my way is right. My way is right. There needs to be a coming together. And this goes back to unity, but there's some that will never, it goes back to like the thirds theory. You've got the third that are already doing it, right? Like, it's not going to be difficult for them whenever that happens, but whenever whatever happens, because they're already living in that space. And then you've got the third that can go either way. And then you've got the third that will never do it, and they'll die. I mean, because kind of what I'm going to in my mind is, and it's one of my favorite books, the book Alas Babylon, that everybody had to read in like 8th grade or, in high school. And it's literally about a catastrophic situation where a community is disconnected from everybody else, and they just have to figure it out on their own. And we're seeing a lot of that. We are going to continue to see that everywhere. And it goes back to also, if those things aren't worked through in a way of compassion and healing for the people that are experiencing it, it's just like a cancer. It's going to grow. And there's this very us and them mentality of like, well, we're okay over here as long as they stay over there, right? And that is not how this works at all. And that's just what I'm seeing in a lot of different places is, if you can't learn to work together, like one side will come up and the other side will go down.
Yeah, I remember, I actually say this a lot, but there was a point in my life where I was like, rationality serves instinct, not the other way around. And I've told lots of people, human reason is in its adolescence at best.
Yeah.
Human instinct is time tested.
Yeah.
It's been around for a lot longer than human reason. And so I even asked one of our science guests, which of those do you prefer to rely on, human reason or human instinct? And he said, 90% of the time it's instinct. Go with your gut.
Yeah.
And then there's a 10% where things actually have to be thought through, and the math needs to be done, and the I's need to be dotted and the T's need to be crossed.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're running on caveman software, and it's just you go and you go and you go. You do what you feel is right, whether you have scientific proof for it or not. You just go with it, and it turns out to be right most of the time.
Yeah. And there is the place for analysis, right? It's not when you're running from the dinosaur, or like, it's not when you're running from the saber-tooth tiger. You're right.
It's too late then.
Yeah. It goes back to, intuition, like to me, instinct and intuition, like they pop up right away and they lead you in the right direction. To me, the logical mind, like the human, it's also, I mean, ego, right? It's the thing that says, wait, like stop. And I mean, and so, I mean, and I think in a lot of like the ways that we're moving in, that can get you killed. You know, it's to follow that, because intuition and instinct, that's self-preservation. To me, even though like logic, it's based in the brain or the mind, right? It's something that has been created out here. Intuition is in here. And so, like, inherently, I'm always going to listen to that because it always is what takes me in the right direction. And to me, logic takes too long. You know, if you're in a space where you're safe and then you can analyze, maybe then, you know, but to me, I'll always go to intuition first.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you said something about survival, right? Instinct's about survival. And I think that a lot of us were put into survival mode in the recent history. And so we turn to those instinctive, the history, the tradition, because we know that that's time tested. We know that that works. And a lot of us developed a very heavy distrust for experts, for authority, because they were learning as they went along. You know, like I said, the human reason, the science was developing as the situation progressed, and they didn't really know the answer, even though they were acting as though they did.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of us, I know me and my family, we were looking at it like they act like they know. And I've seen this because my dad does it. My dad, he'll get asked a question that he doesn't know the answer to. And in real time, he's like trying to come up with the answer. You know, you see the hamsters turning in his brain, and he'll spout the answer, and it sounds good, like it's plausible, but he doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that I was seeing. I was like, they're just coming up with this in real time. They don't know. They're experimenting. And
this goes back to the ego. The ego doesn't want to look stupid. Logic, like the ego, instinct doesn't care. Like instinct doesn't care if this is going to get me out of this situation. I don't care how stupid I look. Where like logic and ego and this need to look a certain way, it kind of takes me back to like the Emperor's New Clothes, right? Like if you can trick enough people to believe that you're an expert, like who's in charge? You know, and it's very, and that's where you see what's kind of happening right now. I mean, not kind of, what is happening right now is that, and I think this is also the pulling back from that. You're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing in places where people are like, I don't trust the government anymore. You know what? Because where are the instances where you've given me the proof that I should, right? And a lot of logic is about proof, right? It's about data, but then now you've got these splintered like other facts, and it's like, what? I mean, like I don't understand that. Like, how can everything is so splintered right now, and so, but we know. I mean, if you really boil it down, you know, inside, and I think that also goes back to people don't want to have been fooled. People don't want to say, well, I was with this person and they were totally like took a dive, off a cliff, and they'll die with that person to not say I was wrong. Yeah. And that's a big piece of where you're seeing the splintering is that nobody wants to look stupid, but I'll tell you, if I'm trying to survive, then I don't care how stupid I look.
So that was Sticks Boy. He says it was information for information's sake, right or wrong. It was given out to quell the need for information about what was happening. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you look to experts because they're supposed to get a handle on things, but their authority has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Not to be justified, but where you come in is, I imagine that people are coming to you, you're talking about the splintering, to make sense of which of these paths or which of these tribes they ought to belong to.
Well, and it's always going inside. And now, like I said, we're seeing a lot of work and ancestral work where it's like going back to what you said earlier, what's tried and true, what has worked in the past, and people usually reach out to me when they're like, I've tried everything. Now I want to see like what, and we always, it's like, okay, go back to when you trusted yourself, go back, like, when was that place? And some people are like, I never have. And I'm like, okay, well, then that's where, like, we need to build that. We need to open, like, I'm seeing kind of like opening up something and then seeing what is there. Because, like, if people are like, I've never trusted myself, who have you trusted? And that's one of the things I'm seeing a lot around boundaries, around people completely disconnecting from something that might not have ever served them, being part of this way of thinking, or there's, in a lot of the work that I do, you see loyalty. Like, there's this loyalty to the degree of a fault, where it's like, oh, I'm going to stick with this idea. Like I said, like, go off the cliff with it. And it's like, how is that working for you? If you're with me, if you have sought me out, that tells me right now that that's not working for you. So let's find a place where things can work for you and start as that as your starting point. And, it takes a lot of introspection. And this is not just one reading. I'm starting to do longer readings and like kind of longer experiences now that have just started to show up that way. And there's a few that I'm kind of going to put together as one, just because people are connected through their information, right? Is that sometimes it takes that amount of time to get to the place where the untruth is. And for me to like call that out and finally have like the thing that they've built up, and for everybody to see and be like, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, let's start there. Where did this start? And I have started doing more like ancestral work, and I've never been drawn to ancestral work before. Great, whatever, people talk about the ancestors, but the people that are showing up to me are showing up, and their ancestors are showing up too, because it's like they're showing up to say, you're doing this all wrong. And it feels like there's groups of people around people that are like, they're showing up. I want to go back to the ghost thing, like what we were talking about at the beginning, which is, if you're just showing, and people don't just call me for readings to be entertained. Like they show up to do real work.
They need help. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, I'm done trying this on my own, And so it's kind of like, okay, are you wanting to be entertained, or you really wanted to do some work? And going back to like what Kyle was saying, when you're open, instead of showing up with all these barriers in the way, you're going to get further faster. And that's why I always say people show up to me when they've done everything else. And it's literally like 52 card pickup. Okay, somebody needs to help me put these cards back together again. And they're not going to go back together they were the way before, And that's what I'm seeing is people are ready to do something different, and they're not afraid to look stupid. That's one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is people are really, to answer your question from like right at the beginning, people are leaning more towards spirituality because, and this again is not a judgment on my part, but if they feel like religion has failed them, and that's what their base was built on, they're going to look for something else. And it's available to everybody. I mean, that's another thing too, is how many places do we see now where, well, if you don't look like this or act like this, you're not welcome. Right? Like spirituality welcomes everybody. The one thing that I'll say is I'm nobody's guru. I don't want to be anybody's guru. I want to work with people and help them find their own tools. And then they can move on and maybe they can help somebody else. And I also want to really speak to community, because we're just seeing such a lack of community, even after COVID, people are being able to come out of their houses again and they're able to meet, but people aren't doing that. They're, making plans and ditching plans. There are people that are doing it, and there need to be more people that are doing it. and that are just saying like, I'm seeing a lot of false starts with people that are wanting to do things and then they pull back. But there is a real need for community, like right now, and it's been there for a while, and that's something I'm seeing too, is ancestors are pulling people together. They're almost like, hey, let's get these fools paying attention to what they really need. And that's what I'm seeing too, is like people that are coming to me they're connected by their experiences, right? Their lived experience. They're not experts that are showing up saying, I need for everybody to see how much I know. They're just saying, I'm ready to show up and help with my lived experience of what I've been through. And those are real communities.
Yeah. One of these themes that keeps popping up in my life, there's this tree in Utah that it's like a whole forest. It's like a 40,000 acre forest is all one tree.
Yeah.
It's like the century aspen or something like that. And each individual tree, or they call them stems because it's like a connected root system. And then each individual tree that you see pop up from the ground, they call it a stem. But the whole forest is genetically identical.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really fascinating, because the difference between me and my dad genetically is so negligible. It's like we might as well be the same DNA, because the percentage difference is like so small.
Yeah.
Same with me and my mom, right? And so I started to wonder, if so much of us is in common, does that play out in the way that our lives have developed over time? And I remember an experience where I was angry with my brother, and so I went to flip him off, and my dad was there, and he caught me, and he goes, "What the?" He's like getting after me, and I got in trouble, right? And I was like, that was a dumb thing, but then he later told me that a very like almost the exact same experience happened to him, where he was angry with his brother, and then his dad caught him, got after him, and then I said, well, how far back does that go? Do you know if, did your dad do something similar and he got busted by his dad? He's like, every generation I know of had something stupid like that happen to them along the way. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe there's something to this tree that we can learn from, which is that we're all like stems growing from the same root, which is our DNA.
Yeah. And
so that lived experience you're talking about that goes generations back, if we can somehow tap into that, journaling in my faith, journaling is kind of like a big deal, because that wisdom, that generational wisdom, gets to be preserved.
Yeah.
And go down to the next generation, so that I'm not trying to take business away from you, Deb. That's
no. You know what? This is what I always think, is there's more than enough. There is somebody. I am not in competition with anyone, because nobody does exactly what I do, and I don't do exactly what anybody else does. And so that's why I'm always like, if you get drawn to somebody, work with them, because there is something that spoke to you. Like, people a lot of times will say, I saw your picture and I knew it was you. Like, I knew you were the person. And so, no, I am in no way thinking that you're trying to take anything away from me, ever. I would never do that.
But I'm saying, like, it's correlation between what you're saying. The ancestors are coming forward to impart generational wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying, is like, if you want to, the Back to the Future wish fulfillment was, I have a regret that I want to change.
Yeah.
Well, you can do that by teaching your kids.
Yeah.
And if you want to see the future, go talk to your parents and see how they dealt with the situations you're dealing with now.
Yeah. Because your parents are the experts of their own experience.
Yeah.
And that's something that I see a lot of, is like, and I do some work with adolescents, right? I do work in a lot of different places, but it's like, well, we don't want to listen to them, but I can show up as a parent and probably tell them the exact same thing that their parents would, but it's coming from a different voice, right? Yeah. It's doable for them, because I'm not their parent. I'm somebody else coming from, I have a different perception, and I don't have the judgment that a parent would have on them, their parent, right? Or they don't see me with the same set of eyes that they see their parents. the perception is different. And that's why I love group work. I love being able to kind of like the supper club, like bringing people together that say, I never thought about it that way, but you just said it. Like I have had that same experience, but I've never looked at it that way. So it's just, and that goes back to community. It goes back to the need for people to hear somebody else say in a space where they feel supported, where they feel like I can say anything, where other people can hear those anythings that they're saying and be like, dude, I've never told anybody this, but I had almost the exact same thing happen to me. And it's interesting because we've got like siblings by bond. And then we've got what I'm seeing is that there's roots that go out this way, and then the trunk of the tree goes up, and then the roots go down, right? But like those roots that are underground, like you said, they go far out. And there's a really good book called The Hidden Life of Trees. And there's a very good podcast, it's only like an hour, called From Tree to Shining Tree. We have so much to learn from trees. I mean, it's so fascinating about how they communicate. They communicate through fungi that's under the underground, like electronic impulses that move through the root system. I'm not going to get into this because that's a whole other topic, but like if you're interested in that, look it up, because there is so much support that we have not needed to accept in the past. But while I'm talking about this, it makes me think about Harvey, like when Harvey happened in Houston. And because of what had happened in Katrina, everybody knew that nobody was going to show up from the government. And the Cajun Navy, there's some videos online of just private individuals with boats, like this huge long line of them coming from Louisiana to support Texas when Harvey happened. And that's what we're moving towards. I mean, it's the knowing you're going to make the call and nobody's going to come. Yeah. And knowing that it takes a community that has been through it and has a really crappy lived experience to say, I'll show up for you. Yeah. I'll show up when nobody else will.
That actually is a really beautiful place to end up. Because there's another thing I say a lot, but you go from believing in Santa to not believing in Santa to you are Santa.
Yeah.
And you get to be the Santa to the people who need help. And that's a really wonderful and powerful place to be.
Yeah.
Kyle, anything else?
Do you see two old people standing behind me?
This is Kyle's new test for psychic. Please.
I see two old people standing behind you? So I will tell you, I don't usually see like that. So my answer to you is no. But you know what? If I trotted my husband in here, this is the interesting thing. I'll tell you this really quick. I don't see things, but I did not know for years. My husband sees people in our home. And the only reason I knew that is I did a podcast when I had my radio show with a medium, and she was telling me everybody that was in our house, and I told him about it. And he's like, oh yeah, I know exactly who she's talking about. And I was like, what? Why haven't you told me any of this? He keeps everything close to the vest. So sorry, Kyle. I don't see
it's cool.
like that. So, and I'm not going to lie to you. Never.
That's the best thing. That's what we love about you, Deb. You don't lie to us. You don't tell us, just try to, wash our heads and fill us full of yarn. So
no reason for it.
So, I guess, Kyle, you didn't have any like personal questions or anything. Last time Kyle asked you for a real quick card reading, didn't you, Kyle?
It was you.
Did. Yeah, it was you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked about my kids' flag football team.
Yeah.
I did ask about that. And your response, what you said was, it's about the love of the game. People will keep coming back. And that is true. The players and their parents, they want me to keep coaching.
Yeah.
But I took it to mean we weren't going to win any games that year.
So did you win any games?
We did not win a single game.
I thought you maybe told me that I think you had messaged me and said, well, you were right, and we didn't win any games. But you know what? There's so much more learning happening. And as a coach, because I used to coach kids soccer, there's so much more learning in losing than there is in winning. I mean, winning is great, don't get me wrong. But, those are the times and the difficulties, within the team dynamic. And that's like I see like the parents kind of on the side. And like it also looks like whenever you pull a child aside, like I want to go back to, it might be something they would have said, but it's different because it's coming from their coach. Or it might be something that they said earlier that day that the kid didn't hear. But having that, or that you say it, it's the importance of having extra people in children's lives, that are, and I feel like that's what I am a lot of the times when I'm doing readings. I'm like, this stuff, you just have to hear it from somebody else's mouth. And I've had more than one person say, yeah, you're telling me something that I've known for a really long time. And I'm like, well, then let's get to why you're not doing it. And like, let's get past that. So.
But psychically, is there anything you see within me, not the people behind me, but like something coming up or something like you saw that Sam was gonna be 0-10.
It's 0-18.
0-18.
Okay, so when you ask me that question, what I see is, and it's one of two things. It's either going up a hill, but it feels more like a wave. It feels more like a wave going up and coming back at you.
More risky? Is that more of a risk involved?
More like something good's going to happen. It's going to fall off.
No. It looks like what it looks like is a building towards something. That's why I was like, is it a wave or is it, because the feeling that I also get, it's almost like around education. It's like a learning something, but I'm asking the question, like, why is the wave coming back? Because there's two different things I see. It's like going up a hill, but not really sliding down the other side. That's the part where I feel like it's not a hill. It feels more like a wave. So as I'm saying that too, because it feels like it's around education, because I'm asking the question always like, help me understand this better. It looks like an investment in something that you then get the money back on.
Oh, hey, Kyle.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's talk about crypto.
No, it's not crypto. I know that.
No, but that's what, because when I was hearing like it's an investment, like to me, education is an investment that has a return. And so that's the energy that it has behind it. Like you're putting something into something that you will get a return from. So what does that mean to you?
I don't know yet.
Well, I'll tell you, it means something to me. My wife and I have been talking about her going to school to get educated, get some credentials and start.
Hey, this is about me, Sam.
Yeah, you're right.
Take the light off of you for a minute.
So Kyle, shift it for a second and let him finish saying what he was saying. So remember when I told you sometimes things are connected, and like you said, obviously connected. So an interesting word that you just said though was credentials. But tell me the rest of your statement.
Oh, that she could, she's just about ready to send our youngest off to school, and she's in a period of, I feel like you've been talking to me about my wife this whole episode. I just want you to know that. Like everything you're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope she's tuning in. Like everything you've said, it's like, okay, that's happening. And so the idea was she was wanting to explore, and I was like, yeah, I could use all the help I can get to explore going out and getting a job and what that would look like and what would be the best use of her time.
So go ahead, keep talking.
And education was one of the things that we've been talking about a lot.
So I will tell you, sorry, Kyle, that's
it's all good.
kick back for a minute. Look for masses walking in front of a window, because I'm going to talk to Sam for a second. So it feels like the education that she thinks she's going to go to for is not the education she's actually going to get. And it looks, sometimes I'll see this where like the thing that someone thinks is the path, it's actually over and to the side. And there's a couple of other things I want to say too, is that it feels like she's got most of the education that she already needs. This is something that I see a lot where someone's like, oh, I need the letters behind my name. She's the only person that's going to care about that. It feels like there's a small amount of education, again, to the side of what she thinks she's going for, that she's going to be like, I already know this stuff. And I'm going to speak back to lived experience. It's the lived experience that people are drawn to. It's not as much the letters. And nobody's going to be like, oh, let me go to the state board or what. I mean, like, unless it's a doctor that she's trying to be. Don't tell your wife that I'm telling her to do surgery without some kind of knowledge of that. But no, it goes back to, and I'm not saying it's ego with your wife, but it's like societally, there's so much that we think we need, like all this, like, oh, if I get to this level of knowledge, then I'll be ready. It feels like she's got a lot of it already, and she could already be working in some places. And then, so this also might be a piece of that too, which is like, I have a friend that they pay for her school. Like the place that she works pays for her to go to school. But it does feel like I want to go back to it being in the investment, is that there is a piece where she has to put a bit of an investment in to get that return back. So, but it feels like she gets it back like over, like threefold or tenfold. So it's like having skin in the game. You know what I mean? Oh, yay. Thanks, Charlie. I see. That's awesome. And it's funny because this show is so different than the last one that we did. Like that one I felt like was funner, like we had more laughs, but it's, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. That it is very relative. But it is that people know their stuff. They feel like they have to go to school to learn that stuff, but and I'm going to go back to the collective. I mean, there's so many places where I've learned things just by calling somebody that's like to the side to me in the field, where it's like, I couldn't have gotten that answer if I'd have gone up the chain, and I think this is very relative to the conversation that we're having, which is leaning on each other. It feels like she even probably knows somebody that whatever her experience is, it would be like what I'm seeing is links, like coming together, that like there's already a group or people that like she would fit together, like a team that she would fit together perfectly with. But if she does feel like she needs to go get all this schooling and all of this stuff, it's like there's an opportunity that could be missed. It'll come back around again, but it could be a missed opportunity. So really, honestly, for her to kind of start putting some feelers out now. And it even sometimes whenever I see this, it's like there's somebody that she's done work with in the past that has moved into a different space, that she like this also feels like a synchronicity in the way of like reconnecting with someone and being like, I didn't know you were doing that now. And then
You're kidding me. Oh my gosh. That just happened. That absolutely just happened last weekend.
Yeah.
She reconnected with the friend that she moved out to Arizona. She's from Kansas. So she moved out to Arizona with a friend 20 years ago. And they just barely reconnected going back to their high school reunion. And all the things that you just said, she said to me on the ride home from the airport.
And that's why we love talking to you.
Well, it's funny too, because like even I think that's what happened last time. I think you asked Kyle if he had a question, and then, or something, because you were thinking that it was Kyle that I talked to last time, and it was you. Like, it's always you, Sam.
See, that's what I'm saying. It's the spotlight's always on.
I'm such a ball hog. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Well, as long as Kyle doesn't mind, and I don't think he does. Do you know what I mean? And it's interesting too, because like I'm going to go back to Kyle, like seeing that mass, but I feel like for you, Sam, things do need to be maybe a little more pointed, where Kyle's getting things throughout. And I think that even going back and listening to this, something that Kyle might have a question about that he doesn't know might be answered in the show.
Yeah.
And it also,
I'll go back and listen.
it feels like Kyle also and it feels like this in a few different ways, that you are happy to take a step back for somebody else to get what they need.
Oh yeah.
He's very generous co-host. That's for sure.
It feels like you're like the support that, that's what it feels like. There's like, I'm like, there's no other words. Like you're the support, but in a lot of different places. But that you do. And I will tell you that there's a lot of that needed right now. So thank you.
Amen to that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Big pat on the Kyle back. All right. Well, gosh, we've gone 15 minutes over our usual time. Thank you so much, Deb. No, not a problem at all.
We love talking to
see where
you.
it goes. Like
I know. I love talking to you guys too.
We're just open. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
But we'll go ahead and wrap up. So again, if you are wanting to connect with Deb, at Traveling Psychic on Instagram, you're on Facebook and Twitter too, right?
Yes. I'm barely ever on Twitter. Like I can only put my energy towards one thing and it really is mostly Instagram. And then I'm Deborah Hernandez Antich. That's my personal, my personal page on Facebook. And then I've got a Traveling Psychic Separate Club Facebook group too, that is private. And of course the website too.
Yeah. Make sure you connect with Deb. As you can see, she is a treasure. She's got a lot of insight. Seriously, we have a lot of people on the show, and Kyle and I always say, we got to get Deb back. We got to get Deb back.
Yeah.
I'm happy at any time, guys. Anytime.
Thank you so much. Make sure, for our listeners, make sure you like, comment, subscribe if we've earned it. And until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.